It all started as a hunting trip. You know, the kind of thing we do every year. Me, Jake, and Nate. It was supposed to be a break from everything. No cell service, no noise, just the wilderness and us. We'd rented this cabin up north, deep in the woods where people don't bother going because it's too far off the beaten path. Perfect for a long weekend of getting lost, cracking beers, and telling each other stories around the campfire. Little did we know, we'd end up being part of a story ourselves. The first couple of days were exactly what we needed. We spent most of our time hunting deer, grilling, and hanging out around the fire. It was quiet, and the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts float on by without sticking around too long. That is, until the third night. The woods started to feel different. Jake said it was just the wind, but I don't know. Something was off. It began with a sound, a low, almost mechanical clicking noise. I heard it first while sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, looking out into the dark. The fire had burned low, just embers left. There wasn't a breeze, no rustling in the trees, nothing but that clicking. Nate, half drunk and half asleep, didn't hear it at first, but I did. I got up, squinting into the woods, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. "Think you saw something? Or is it just the beer?" Jake asked, noticing me staring. "Listen," I said, motioning with my hand. We all went quiet. The clicking sound stopped. Then, almost on cue, something moved between the trees, something big. "I think it's a deer," Nate muttered, trying to focus through his beer goggles. It moved too fast for me to see clearly, but I could have sworn it wasn't walking like a deer. More like something crouched low to the ground. But deer don't crouch, do they? Nate's hand went to his rifle, but Jake and I waved him off. It wasn't hunting time, and besides, we didn't even know what it was yet. "Relax," I said. "Probably just a bear." We watched for a minute longer, but the thing didn't come back. The woods were still. No more sounds, no more movement. Eventually, we chalked it up to an animal passing through and headed inside. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake that feeling. The woods felt like they were watching us now. The next day, we decided to explore further into the forest. It was Nate's idea, of course. He'd heard rumors of an abandoned logging camp deeper in the woods and was convinced we'd find something cool out there. Reluctantly, Jake and I went along. The forest seemed different the deeper we went. The trees grew closer together, and everything was too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just that eerie, suffocating silence. I'd never been a superstitious guy, but something about those woods felt wrong. Then we found the deer, or what was left of it. We were walking through a particularly dense patch when Nate suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. There, lying half covered in a tangle of brush, was the body of a deer. Its neck was bent at an unnatural angle, legs stiff in the air. The eyes had been pecked out, and the body looked like it had been chewed on, but not by something small like a fox or coyote. No, these were big bites. It was wrong, the kind of wrong that turns your stomach. "Bear got to it," Jake said, but his voice sounded thin, like he didn't even believe himself. Nate crouched down to take a closer look, and that's when we saw it. A massive set of claw marks, deep and long, raked across the deer's side. I'd seen bears take down deer before, but these were different. They were too long, too clean. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested, but Nate waved me off. "Relax, it's just a bear," he said, though his voice wasn't as steady as usual. We pressed on, Nate leading the way. I could tell Jake was just as uneasy as I was, but we didn't say anything. After all, what could it be if not a bear? An hour or so later, we found the old logging camp, or rather, what was left of it. A few rusted-out cabins and machinery were all that remained, swallowed by the forest. It was creepy, but nothing out of the ordinary, just an old abandoned place. But that feeling of being watched? Yeah, it followed us all the way there. We didn't stay long. Nate grabbed a couple of photos and we started heading back. That's when the real trouble began. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees when we heard it again. The clicking sound. It was distant at first, like it had been the night before. But this time, it didn't stop. It followed us, staying just out of sight, growing louder and more erratic the further we walked. We quickened our pace, the unease settling into something more urgent. My heart pounded louder with each step, And I'm not ashamed to admit, I almost shit myself when I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. It was big, hulking, with limbs that were far too long for its body. At first I told myself it was just a trick of the light or a bear loping through the undergrowth. But no, it wasn't moving like a bear. It moved faster, slinking low to the ground, unnaturally fluid like it didn't have bones. More like something gliding over the forest floor than walking. I stopped dead in my tracks, a chill creeping up my spine as my legs turned to stone. My mouth went dry, and what I think I saw, made my blood freeze. And not in that, oh, this is creepy kind of way, but in the something is fundamentally wrong here way. The air around me seemed to grow colder, sharper. The woods, usually alive with rustling leaves and the distant calls of birds, felt like a tomb, a place where sound dared not enter. It wasn't a deer, and it damn sure wasn't a bear. In the fading light, I caught a better look, just for a second. But that second felt like an eternity stretched thin. It was pale, almost sickly white, with skin stretched too tight over bones that seemed all wrong, like they didn't fit together the way they should. No fur, no muscle, just a gaunt skeletal form with an elongated head that didn't belong to any creature I knew. The eyes, if you could call them eyes, were nothing but hollow black pits sunken into its skull, as if the forest itself had swallowed any light or life they might have once held. It moved on all fours, but not like an animal. The way its limbs bent, jerky and uneven, was wrong, unnatural, like something trying to mimic how a creature should move but failing, its joints shifting in ways they shouldn't. Every part of it screamed unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world, like it was an invader from some other place, some other reality where rules of movement and anatomy simply didn't apply. Jake saw it too. I didn't need to look at him to know. We were both frozen in the same paralyzing fear. When I did glance over, his face was pale as the moon, eyes wide and wild. He fumbled for his rifle, hands shaking, nearly dropping it as he wrestled to get a grip. I knew in that moment he was thinking exactly what I was. We were no longer the hunters out here. Something else was. Run! Nate's voice shattered the silence like a gunshot, and we didn't need telling twice. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, our feet moving faster than our brains could keep up. Branches whipped against our faces, the sting barely registering as the adrenaline surged through my veins. The clicking sound, oh God, that clicking, was louder now, no longer distant. It followed us. No, it hunted us, the cadence of the noise rising in speed and urgency, echoing through the trees. Whatever it was close. Too close. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I didn't want to see it again. I didn't want to see those hollow, lifeless eyes, that twisted, jerking figure coming after us with an unnatural hunger. The way it moved, there was no doubt in my mind it wasn't just chasing us, it was toying with us. And that terrified me more than anything. This wasn't a predator looking for food. It was something that wanted us to know we were prey. The forest blurred around me, my lungs burning as we ran. Every step felt heavier, the undergrowth pulling at my legs, like the woods themselves were trying to drag me down. The sound, it wasn't just behind us now. It felt like it was everywhere. The trees, the ground. The air itself thrummed with that clicking, each beat faster and faster, syncing up with the pounding of my heart. We ran until I thought my legs would give out, until my chest felt like it was going to explode from the strain. I don't know how, but by some miracle, we made it back to the cabin. We barreled through the door, slamming it behind us so hard I thought the frame would crack. Jake turned the lock with trembling hands as if that flimsy piece of wood and metal could protect us from whatever the hell was out there. For a moment, we just stood there, breathless, waiting for the door to explode inward, for that thing to come crashing in behind us. But it didn't. For a long time, none of us said a word. The air inside the cabin felt too thick, too heavy, as we all tried to catch our breath. The only sound was the ragged rise and fall of our chests, the oppressive silence of the woods outside swallowing up any hope of comfort. No clicking, no movement, just stillness. "What the hell was that?" Jake finally whispered, his voice shaking as he slumped against the wall, still clutching his rifle like it was some sort of lifeline. Nate didn't answer. He just stared at the door, his face as pale as the creature we'd seen, his eyes wide and distant. His usual cocky smirk was gone, replaced with a look of pure, unfiltered terror. Whatever bravado he had left vanished in the face of what we had just encountered. None of us slept that night. We just sat there waiting, listening for the sound of the clicking to return, for the door to rattle in its frame. But it never did. The next morning, we packed up in silence and got the hell out of there, leaving the cabin and whatever it was far behind. We didn't talk about what we saw, not really. Nate still insists it was just a bear, though I can see the doubt in his eyes every time he says it. Jake? He won't even mention it, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything that belongs in those woods. And whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting.